Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody is a child in everybody still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, Doc. So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Grand and Miraculous. It's our 14th episode. It's hard to believe, but I want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to talk about a very special attraction tonight, one that's near and dear to my heart. I know it's one near and dear to many other people in the audience, too. And that is, of course, America Sings. There's so much to talk about this attraction. But first and foremost, I want to thank you for being here. I want to go through chat really briefly because I saw lots of friends in chat already. So first and foremost, Miss Oodalali Lane. Hello, Kate. Hope you're doing well. Beaker and Honeydew, thanks for being here. Lamons Gray has been here from the very beginning. Thank you for being a great supporter, Lamons. Miss K Bell, my stepmom. Hope you're doing great. Fire Dragon 57, thanks for being here. Let's see who else is in the chat. Mr. David T. How are you, sir? I hope everything's going great. Thanks for being here. Theme Park Casual. I was hoping you'd be able to make it. Hope you're doing great. I know that you and I had talked about this attraction for a long time, and we'll have more to say about that in a bit. Miss Dame Dystopia. Hope you're doing fantastic, Dame. Dave Stragand is here. Hey, Dave. Thanks for all your support. Mark Langenkamp is in the house. Brittany W. And I think that is all for now. So if I see more names come in, I'll be sure to say hello. So first and foremost, who are we? Why are we here? Well, my name's John. I go by the username Spaceship Ears. And this series is intended to talk about attractions that we know and love, both existing ones and extinct ones. And our goal here is to tear them apart a little bit, figuratively, of course, and to figure out if they work or not. So the mission statement of this channel, unveil the magic behind theme park attractions, exploring their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back, with your voice shaping the journey. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody in chat, everybody who subscribed, because we have passed a big milestone. We are now at 200 subscribers, which is huge for me. I'm really appreciative for everybody's support. That's a big deal. You know, for a series that I thought might have very niche appeal, I've gotten so much positive feedback about this show. And I hope that each and every entry we make to this series serves as kind of a standalone tribute to these attractions that we know and love. And that's my goal at the end of the day. Even if there's just one person here supporting me, it's great because it'll serve as a long-term kind of artifact for how these attractions really touch the heart of so many people. But having so many people come in and support me, everybody in chat, thank you. This is just a huge deal for me. So I'm really appreciative, looking forward to the next milestone. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, please hit like, and don't forget to share it out. I think I did it right now. Okay, so we're going to talk about a famous attraction for Disneyland folks tonight, America Sings. As I do, I like to put in a little bit of trivia before we get started. So tonight's trivia is, of course, about America Sings. Now, many of you know that America Sings, many of the performers and audio animatronics, after the show closed, they got moved to Splash Mountain, famously. However, there were 2 performers that did not, and they got moved to a very special place. So I'm curious if anyone in chat knows who these 2 performers are and where they ended up. So eventually I'll unveil the answer through the course of tonight. But I also want to encourage you, please share your memories of this great attraction. There are many people on the East Coast who have never had the opportunity or privilege of seeing this show. I'm going to show a little bit of video, God willing, in a little bit, but I definitely want those of you who have seen this show, who have some memories of it, to share your memories in chat, because this is how we keep these memories alive. And these are how we keep these wonderful attractions in our mind. As always, I'd like to encourage you to go to our website. Please go to grandmiraculous.com. We have an online interactive section on the website where you can contribute your voice too. Tonight's entry code, as TPC mentioned, is a very special code. It's IVES. And in case you don't know why, you'll find out shortly. So again, go to grandmiraculous.com. There's no and in the website, and punch in IVES. Let me go back to chat, say hi to some new folks who showed up. Miss Karen Cook, I hope you're doing great. Thanks for being here, Karen. Gloria Thibodeau is in the house. Of course, my father, Mr. John DeCure. Thank you for being here, Dad. Appreciate it. Nerdy Grandma, I love your username. Thank you for being here. And let's see if I missed anyone else. I think that's it. So again, if I haven't caught your name, please be persistent. I will catch it eventually. Oh, speaking of, I see Mr. Theme Park Giant in the house. TPG is a fantastic streamer, and you should all go support his site too. He streams almost every day now. So thank you for all the support, TPG. And of course, Theme Park Casual as well, and Bob, and everybody else. So let's get to it. I've been talking long enough. So let's talk about America Sings tonight. Again, this is a very, very special attraction to those of us on the West Coast, because many of us grew up knowing and loving this attraction. Many on the East Coast did not. So I hope through the course of tonight, we share some of the magic that made this attraction possible. And again, I'd like to encourage you to share your memories in chat. So, quick methodology recap. This is very subjective. I realize that from the outset. I assert that we can take these attractions and dissect them along 3 different axes. One is immersion. The second is storytelling. The third is delight. And so far, it's worked out pretty well, I'd have to say. Most of the ratings that have come in from you, the audience, have aligned pretty closely with the way that we're teasing these apart. And again, we're representing these on the website through radar plots. So you can see the more that the blue triangle covers the big triangle, the better off the attraction is. Again, this is not a monologue. It's very easy for me to sit up here and talk for an hour, albeit with some water at the end of the night. But my opinion is just an opinion. So it's important that you contribute your voice too. So please do go to the website, go to grandmiraculous.com. Even if you've never seen the attraction, go watch the online video and give us your thought about how this attraction stacks up. Tonight's code is IVES, IVES. So again, I want to mention we're now a proud member of the Disney Streamer Network. I want to thank Mr. Park Bros Lawrence for setting this up. So in case you haven't seen the website, please go to their website. The main page at dsn.disneystreams.com shows who's currently live and who's coming up. So I'd like you to encourage you to please support them, and go subscribe to them. It's a great way to keep up on all the interesting things happening in the Disney online world as far as YouTube goes. And again, keep in mind, this is a labor of love. So please go and support some kind of a charitable organization if you find what you like here. I like Lake Buena Vista Society. They're coming up on a big event coming up in a few weeks called Retro Magic. This is held at the Coronado Springs this year, and it'll be at the end of September. I'm sure after the event, we'll have some more to say about it, but please go support them. They're a great organization. They're a charity, and I'm happy for what they do. I hope some fine day we can do something similar over here on the West Coast. Now, there's a little bit of unfinished business we've got to talk about. So last Tuesday, we talked about the Carousel of Progress, okay? Now, Disney, in their unending wisdom, decided to drop some pretty major news after I had covered Carousel of Progress. So what happened? Well, they had a big event this weekend called Destination D23, and they dropped a very important nugget. Turns out they're going to go and revisit the Carousel of Progress. In particular, they're going to add a brand new opening scene with the animatronic Walt Disney. Now, this will probably be an upgraded version of the version we've seen in Disneyland, but I'm very happy to see that they're bringing an animatronic Walt Disney to this beloved attraction. I can't think of a better place on property that deserves animatronic Walt introducing this beloved attraction to the audience. So I wanted to recognize this. I wanted to say, hey, these attractions are never complete, as Walt famously said. I look forward to seeing what will come soon. And I do want to point out, you know, if you've seen this preliminary sketch from Disney, you'll probably see a lot of very familiar artworks on the walls there. So I'm very happy to see some of the design lineage show through, at least in some of the early plans. You know, you have Ryman's famous sketch of Progress City here. You have John Hench's monorail in the background, other Carousel of Progress stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they can come up with. Let me go back to chat really quick and say hi to some folks. Mr. Joseph Sharp, thanks for being here, Joseph. I appreciate it. Let's see who else is in the house. Ross and Found. Hey, Ross, hope you're doing great. Tammy Delaney. Hey, Tammy, hope you're doing fantastic. Thanks for being here. And if I see more folks, please chat, say hi. Okay, let's talk about tonight's featured attraction, which is America Sings. Now, I realize coming into this, I'm coming from a little bit of a disadvantage because many West Coasters have very beloved memories of this attraction. However, many East Coasters may not. So I'll beg your indulgence, and I'll try and play some video later on. We'll see if the streamer gods keep me online or not. But if not, you know, I'll always record something after the fact. We'll see how it goes. As always, we'd like to talk about our Imagineers first. I want to keep in your mind an Imagineer flipbook. So all of these Imagineers that you hear constantly over and over again, they should start to become rote. And then you can start associating these famous attractions with these famous Imagineers. Well, first and foremost, America Sings would be impossible to talk about without this man, Mr. Marc Davis. Marc Davis, as some of you know, applied many humorous and very cartoonish type of techniques to the theme park attractions, including Pirates of the Caribbean. He was one of Disney's 9 old men. America Sings is no exception. We'll talk about exactly what his impact was for America Sings. But we would not have this attraction without Marc Davis being involved. This is a new one, Mr. Albertino. So some of you may recognize a first name. Well, there's a reason for that. Albertino was a longtime Disney animator, and he was a creative that worked on many classic films like Pinocchio, Fantasia, and he wrote for The Wonderful World of Disney. He helped design lots of attractions like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, The Haunted Mansion, Country Bear Jamboree, and of course, America Sings. Those of you who know and love Country Bears may recognize his first name. And yes, it's Big Al in the Country Bear Jamboree is named after this gentleman. You could probably see a little bit of resemblance. Albertino worked at multiple animation studios, and he retired in 1977. He passed away in 1996, but his influence and impact is still felt today. Mr. Buddy Baker, we talked about briefly in other episodes, but I have to highlight him tonight because Buddy Baker was behind many of the pieces of music in this attraction. And this attraction would be nothing if it weren't for the music and for the songs. So it's very important that we do a hat tip to Mr. Buddy Baker because he provided a lot of the orchestration. And as you'll see a little bit later, some of the transitions were very well done. And I'll explain what that means in a bit. And I have a very special non-Imagineer to highlight. It would be impossible to talk about this attraction without this gentleman, Mr. Burl Ives. For those of you who don't know who Burl Ives is, please go look him up. It's probably, he has had some kind of influence on your life in one fashion or another. Mr. Burl Ives is, of course, a very famous musician. He was born in 1909 in Illinois. He transitioned into acting with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in The Big Country, and he earned an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. He recorded over 40 different albums across folk, country, and pop genres. And of course, you may know him from A Holly Jolly Christmas, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, etc. He retired in '89 and he passed away in 1995, but his impact is impossible to underscore or to understate. His contributions remain deeply woven into the cultural fabric. And the reason why we mention him tonight is that he was the narrator of this show, and he was the voice of Sam Eagle, as we'll soon see. So again, if you haven't heard of him, please go look him up. He's had an influence on your life, whether you know it or not. So as we do, let's talk about facts and figures. There's only one instance of this attraction. It was in Disneyland. It opened in June 29th, 1974, and it closed April 10th, 1988. So all told, it was running a little bit higher than 13 to 14 years. Of course, this was during my seminal period. You know, I went to Disneyland when I was a youth. I was born in '74. So when I was going to Disneyland, America Sings was there, and it was a core part of my growth experience. So it's my pleasure to talk about this attraction tonight. In fact, when I created this series, I knew that I had to highlight America Sings, and I've gotten multiple points of feedback from different people expressing the same thing. So we have to set the stage a little bit. Let's take a look at where we were. You remember last week we talked about the Carousel of Progress. Well, during that talk, we talked about how the carousel was relocated to Disneyland after the World's Fair, but it failed to attract a big amount of popularity. GE, of course, proposed moving it to the Walt Disney World in Tomorrowland. Executives agreed, and the attraction was shipped to Florida, where it still operates today. Well, this left Imagineers with a challenge. You have a gigantic piece of real estate, essentially a rotating theater, in Tomorrowland, a massive 2-story theater, custom built for a show that was no longer there. What are they going to do? Well, it turns out that we were coming up on the upcoming US Bicentennial. So it made a lot of sense to repurpose that space and to tip our hat, so to speak, to the Bicentennial by having a very patriotic show that celebrates the founding of America in a new and unique way. So what they came up with was a patriotic musical revue, and it made use of the existing infrastructure in the carousel. Well, we got to talk about Marc Davis's impact here. At the time, as the Bicentennial approached, public fascination with history, iconography, and things like that really surged, especially in the parks. You know, they had already created Liberty Square. Country Bear Jamboree, to a certain extent, celebrated the country. While Marc Davis was reaching the end of his career, and he helped shape Walt Disney World, classics like Tiki Room, Jungle Cruise, and so forth. There were some setbacks, of course. He had an unsuccessful attempt to, arguably unsuccessful, to create Pirates of the Caribbean as kind of a first-class attraction in Magic Kingdom. And if you don't know what I mean by that, we'll cover that when we talk about pirates. And he worked on a big project called the Western River Civilization, which didn't end up coming to fruition. So in the midst of the 70s, he assembled a trusted team to create this attraction called America Sings. This was a heartfelt tribute to 200 years of American music, blending humor, history, and theatrical ingenuity. Now, this attraction involved singing throughout the centuries. It was a musical journey through U.S. history, performed entirely by a huge cast of animatronic animals, geese, pigs, eagles, and so forth. The show opened in Tomorrowland in Disneyland on June 29th, 1974, and it aligned pretty well with Independence Day, which of course was almost less than a week later on July 4th. Well, it ended up running for 14 years. It closed in 1988, and it was housed, of course, in the same rotating theater in the Carousel of Progress. Now, the theater was a perfect fit physically. There was no better physical location for having this kind of a show that rotated. We talked last week about how efficient this particular theater was with its rotating audience. Same thing applied to America Sings. This attraction could just eat up people, and it was no problem in terms of high capacity. However, it didn't really fit in Tomorrowland, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. It had a very nostalgic tone, and it ended up clashing with Tomorrowland's futuristic theme, arguably. This was a bicentennial revue, you can think of. Fast-paced musical show designed to entertain people of all ages. The show what's interesting about how they staged the show was that they created some pretty innovative staging techniques. Unlike Carousel of Progress, where everybody was on stage at once and all they did was to rotate some aspects on the sides, they actually had characters rise up and down into view and out of view. And what they did was that they lit one side of the stage and then kept the other side darkened so that they could lower and raise other characters. You'll see this type of effect in the American Adventure in Epcot, for example. So what was nice about it was that while your focus was on one side of the stage, you didn't know what was happening on the other side until the light hit it. Of course, it built on the audio animatronic traditions of other types of attractions as well, but there was a little bit more dynamic movement and theatrical flair. So what I want to do is to talk a little bit about the prologue and the different acts in the show, but I also want to show you the prologue and Act 1. I don't think I have time to show you the whole show, but if time permits, maybe at the end, I'll show you another act. But I want to set the stage a little bit. So when you enter the theater, as the theater door is closed, two characters show up. There's Sam Eagle and his wisecracking sidekick, Ollie the Owl. These are the two characters you see represented here. They delivered a prologue, setting the tone for the musical journey ahead. And then what happened is that much like Carousel of Progress, guests start rotating around 6 stages. So there were 4 different acts. So there was a prologue, 4 acts, and then an outro, basically at the end of the show. And what's nice is that they actually had Sam and Ollie throughout. So they introduced each act as they came up, much like the main narrator did in Carousel of Progress. Once the theater stopped moving, you had a new act, just like Carousel did. And here's Sam and Ollie. And let me just introduce Act 1, and then I'll share. Actually, let's play the prologue so that you know what I'm talking about.
Yankee Doodle went to town a-riding on a pony. Stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Yankee Doodle. Yes, folks, that was America's first popular song. And that's what this show is all about. America's music.
Where'd the songs come from, Sam?
Why, they were the songs that people brought from their native countries.
They did? What kind of music was it?
Sometimes it was happy, sometimes it was sad, and sometimes it just spoke of love, like, I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair.
Very nice, but frankly, I prefer all around the cobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel, the monkey thought 'twas all in fun.
And now, let's travel on through history and hear America sing.
Sing it, Sam!
Yankee Doodle traveled south, riding on a riverboat. Played a tune and sang it out, it sounded like a billy goat. Yankee Doodle liked the South, sang their song so dear. Thought they were most elegant for everyone to hear. Yankee Doodle sing it up, the Yankee Doodle thing. They find the music and the work and get the song behind it.
All right, so that was the opening. We'll come back to it in a second. Sorry if you got into it. And like I think someone mentioned in chat, there was actually a large amount of audience participation. You know, it wasn't infrequent that when he started singing Yankee Doodle, you got lots of people in the audience clapping, just like you did in Country Bear Jamboree. You don't see that so much in Carousel, but it definitely kept the energy high by using Yankee Doodle as kind of a primary theme. So again, I'm going to also show some artwork. There's so much wonderful artwork from Marc Davis, and Marc actually he drew so many wonderful scenes for this. In fact, something I'll talk about in a bit. He was almost too good at it. So you can see here Sam Eagle and of course Ollie the Owl. So Act 1 swung into place, or I should say you swung into Act 1. And Act 1 was all about swamp songs, Southern spirit at the beginning of the 1800s. So it unfolded in a whimsical deep South swamp. And you had a quartet of geese. Now, one thing that's constant is that there were 4 geese that kicked off each act. And what these geese did in Act 1 was to sing Dixie, Little Liza Jane, Camptown Races. Again, you're not going to hear modern songs here. These are mostly songs in the public domain. There was a basset hound gently rocks as a chorus sings My Old Country Home. The Swamp Boys was a trio of alligators and frogs, and there was even a raccoon with a harmonica. They sang Polly Wally Doodle. And then you had a weary possum. Those of you who remember Splash Mountain may recognize this possum. Well, she was very sad, and she sang, Lord, I wish I was single again. And that was a big crowd pleaser at the time. Then you see a coyote crooning the Birmingham jail as a jail cell rised behind him. And then finally, you had a big spirited ensemble with a bunch of foxes, hens, and frogs, and they were singing Down by the Riverside. And that was just a really exciting type of transition over to the next scene. A couple things I want to point out that we'll talk about in a bit is you have the 4 geese starting out each act. Occasionally, you have Sam Eagle and Ollie coming out as a kind of a transition period. Keep that in mind. You see the weasel popping out. It said, pop goes a weasel. That's also a transition scene we'll talk about. And then finally, you have a big number that ends the act. And this is kind of a pattern you'll see throughout Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and Act 4. So before we get to Act 1, I want to focus on chat again. I see some good friends. Mr. Dave's Disney Dreams. Hello, Dave. Hope you're doing fantastic. Thanks for being here. Let's see if I recognize anybody else. I think that is it. So again, if you haven't said hi, please say hi. So here's a great, wonderful drawing from Marc Davis. There's just so many great pictures here. And this represents the end of Act 1. So without further ado, I think we're still here. So let's try and play Act 1 in its entirety and see if it works.
Look away, Dixieland.
the Swamp Boy.
I want to point out real quick, when you see Sam and Ollie arrive, keep in mind what's happening.
And now, a tender complaint. Sung from the heart.
When I was single, dressed up so fine. Now I'm married, don't rock it all the time. Lord, I wish I was a single girl again. Down in the valley so low, late in the evening, hear the train go home. Write me a letter, send it by mail, send it in care of the Birmingham jail.
So you see the weasel? There's a reason for that.
And now let's journey on. That away. Giddy up, you all. Well, Yankee Doodle headed west, working on the railroad, crossing rivers over hills and moving with a big load. Onward west the trains rolled, where cattle were a-grazing. The tales and songs the people sang were really quite amazing. Yankee Doodle sing it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, minding the music and the words with the soft and dandy.
All right. I know you'd love to watch the rest of that, and I would too. Maybe if time permits, we'll play some more. But let's get back to our presentation. So a couple of things you may have noticed, and I saw some comments in chat. Keep the comments coming; they're great. Yes, these animatronics may look very familiar. For those of you who don't know, these animatronics were moved to Splash Mountain. So, for example, the sad possum that you saw there was at the bottom of the drop in Splash Mountain. And there are some other examples too, like the sad rabbit was actually singing, I believe, in Act 3 about her husband who happened to be at the saloon drinking all night. So it's a little bit different context than you've noticed in Splash Mountain. Again, sign of the times. A lot of the contextual cues for these characters were quite different at the time. So Act 2 was all about the Old West. So it unfolded on a moonlit plain of the Old West, and they sang "Drill Ye Terriers Drill." I've been working on the railroad, of course, and Fireball Mail. There was a character introduced called Saddle Sore Swanson, a scraggly turkey with cowboy grit. And he sang the Old Chisholm Trail. There was a sombrero-wearing dog seated on a donkey, and he had a hole shot in his head. And he said, "Who shot that hole in my sombrero?" He sang that, I should say. And then two very special characters showed up, the Boot Hill Boys. These were two Undertaker-dressed vultures. Some of you may recall at the beginning of the lift hill in Splash Mountain, there were two vultures that were staring over at you. These are the exact same two vultures. And they ended up croaking out, so to speak, the tail end of Billy the Kid. So there was a little bit of dark humor even there in America Sings. The act finally closed with a big finale of that act where they had a guitar strumming dog singing Home on the Range. And you start to see different kind of critters appear on the act. So again, here's some wonderful drawings from Marc Davis expressing the end of the act where they're singing Home on the Range. Now we move to the gay 90s, the 1890s ballroom. Of course, we started off with the geese again, and they had beer mugs in their hand, and they started singing a medley. She May Be Somebody's Mother, the Bowery, and After the Ball Is Over. No, I'm not going to sing these. There was a mother rabbit. I already talked about the rabbit, and she sang, "Where is my wandering boy tonight?" Well, the context is she was waiting for her husband to come back from the bar. Suddenly, a pink pig showed up with a pink dress, and she sang out, "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey?" Of course, a very famous song from the moment. There was a character called Blossom-Nosed Murphy, a tipsy goose, and he sang "Sweet Adeline." You remember that one? Joined by the full quartet. And then they moved to an old gray mare, and she sang, well, the old gray mare, about her car that wasn't working so great. Bird in a Gilded Cage showed up singing "I'm Only a Bird in a Gilded Cage." So you can see a lot of these songs were implemented quite literally, blending melancholy with theatrical elegance. Finally, they ended up with a rousing ensemble. All kinds of animals showed up: storks, geese, pigs, you name it. And they sang "Ta Ra Ra Boom Die." Again, here's a picture of what the rabbit looked like for Marc Davis. And again, those of you who have been on Splash probably recognize this very well, albeit in a very different context. Finally, Act 4 brought us to kind of sort of modern day. It brought us back into the 20th century. Again, keep in mind, this was in the 70s to 80s. So they had the quartet of geese open again, and they started out with Jada at the Darktown Strutters Ball and Singing in the Rain. They had 4 Jitterbug era college students with a flag, and it was a fox, a wolf, and 2 cats arrived in a car to sing a tisket, a tasket, and then boo-hoo. There is a pig playing jazz piano, singing "Beat Me Daddy, 8 to the bar," setting the tempo for the act's musical evolution. And then we had the big rock and roll band show up. There was a crane, a rooster, and a porcupine drummer singing "Hound Dog," and then "See You Later, Alligator," which is funny. A rooster and frog kept it going with "Shake, Rattle, and Roll." And then 2 storks showed up on a motorcycle singing "Twisted USA." Finally, they had a big grand finale, and they sang "Joy to the World," Three Dog Night version, closing the show with jubilant flair. Again, here's another picture from Marc Davis, a great drawing of the college students in their car singing away. And then finally, you had a very joyful goodbye. As the show concluded, Sam Eagle reprised "Yankee Doodle" and invited the audience to sing in a heartfelt rendition of "Auld Lang Syne." Guests found themselves back in a theater that looked like the entrance, but it was actually the exit theater. And then they stood up and they filed out while "Stars and Stripes Forever" sang. So the ending blended nostalgia, unity, and a nice theatrical footnote. So the attraction itself opened on June 29th, 1974. There was a huge patriotic dedication ceremony. Again, keep in mind where and when we were less than a week away from the nation's bicentennial. So this was a no holds barred. They pulled out all the stops. They had lots of bands. They had, of course, Sam Eagle there to celebrate, and they had Burl Ives and Mickey Mouse. So I actually have a little bit of video from that opening ceremony. So let's see if this works.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mickey Mouse. Where is Mickey? Here is Mickey. There's his song going in the background. Now, Burl, if you will allow Mickey to take a hold of that cord and present it to you so you can officially unveil the sign. Whenever you're ready, sir.
I'm proud to officially open to the general public Disneyland's 54th major attraction, America Sings. Here goes.
aboard Disneyland's swinging carousel for America Sings.
All right. Thankfully, Sam Eagle didn't fall off from that stoop, but that's a nice little look at how the attraction opened. Let me check in on chat. I see Bitritz. Hey, how's it going, Bitritz? Hope you're doing great. I see some other folks in chat too. I think I saw Joseph and James and some other good friends. So Jonathan Chong's in the house. Hey, Jonathan, hope you're doing great. Gloria Thibodeau, hope you're doing great. Gloria and Jason, thanks for being here and supporting us. So I need to come to a particularly sad part of the show tonight. And I don't normally dwell on unfortunate incidents. However, it's impossible to talk about this history of this attraction without reflecting on one big tragedy, unfortunately. And that is, of course, the tragedy of Miss Deborah Gale Stone. Now, on July 8th, 1974, and this was only 9 days after the attraction opened, there was an 18-year-old cast member, hostess, in fact. Her name was Deborah Gale Stone, and she tragically lost her life. I'm not going to go into details, but suffice to say that the incident occurred while Deborah was greeting guests, and one visitor recognized the emergency that caused the incident. Of course, they shut down the attraction quickly. They implemented lots of safety upgrades, including walls that broke away when the theater was in motion, warning lights, and things like that. This was a very sad moment, and this is impossible to talk about this attraction. And I want to actually highlight something. Many of these attractions that we know and love are very large, very mechanical attractions, obviously. And in some cases, unless you actually adhere to the safety regulations, bad things will happen. And in this case, this is something that very bad that happened to this young girl. So I just want to have a moment of silence to recognize Deborah and to appreciate what she brought to the park and for bringing the magic to us. Thank you for recognizing that. Her death remains one of Disneyland's most heartbreaking moments. Even in places built for joy, safety, and vigilance, we always have to keep these things in mind. So, America Sings lasted about 13 to 14 years. It closed on 1988 after about 14 years of the run. And this was twice a run of the Carousel of Progress in the theater. Now, there was a very famous sign that showed up for many, many years. And you can see it over here on the right. Sorry, we're closed to Imagineer, brand new attraction. This was stuck up there, and this lingered for many, 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 many years. In fact, this sign became so popular and famous that they started creating merch with this sign on it. I remember them selling a magnet with it on it. Well, it turns out that the Carousel Theater was repurposed as office space, and there was a ginormous round building just sitting there in Tomorrowland. Of course, other attractions nearby closed, like Mission to Mars, Skyway, and so forth. So it became a kind of a boarded up downtown block right there in Tomorrowland, unfortunately. Well, they decided to do something with it. And in 1996, they decided to repurpose the space as something called Innoventions. Those of you who know Epcot history, of course, know that Innoventions is what Communicore turned into in its later years. Well, they wanted to bring back some of that sense to Disneyland. So they ended up gutting the inside of the carousel, and they created lots of different kind of, exhibits and things like that inside the building. Now, of course, the original theater had been gutted. Guests entered a 2-level exhibit building, but the rotating lower floor really didn't have a purpose anymore. And people lined up to enter the rotating theater to see a particular entry point to the show. And then they wandered around inside to see different exhibits. Well, it turns out that this attraction was there for nearly 17 years. It closed in 2015. And it never really captured the resonance of its predecessors, whether Carousel or America Sings. Of course, later that year, it turned into what we know as today as Star Wars Launch Bay. Again, it's kind of a gutted interior space where you can go meet Darth Vader and Darth Maul and other characters like that. very similar to the similar attraction in Hollywood studios. Where did the critters go? Well, like I mentioned before, a lot of the animals and the audio and animatronics were packed up and they got moved to different attractions. Well, it turns out that 2 of the geese actually were moved to another attraction we know and love as Star Tours. 2 of the geese were actually stripped and they were turned into droids in the Star Tours entry queue. I have a picture later. And of course, this is the answer to tonight's trivia. Is almost all of the animals and animal in America Sings got moved to Splash Mountain. However, 2 of the geese hung around and they remain to this day as 2 of the droids that we see in the line. In fact, they actually removed one of the geese early. You may notice in the video we just showed, there were only 3 geese. That's because the video I showed was at the tail end of America Sings lifespan. And they only had 3 geese because one of them was taken out to go live in Star Tours. Of course, most of these animals got moved to Splash Mountain, which was based on Song of the South. And there's an artistic through line here. Marc Davis himself worked on Song of the South too. So you have that kind of artistic kind of line that remains constant. Of course, you all know what happened to Splash Mountain. It closed in 2023. And it turned into Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Unfortunately, many of the audio animatronics from America Sings got removed, and they have an entirely new cast of animatronic characters today. I don't know what happened to all the animatronics today. Hopefully they're in a good place, enjoying their retirement. Now, before I get into the analysis of this attraction, I do want to point out that there's an excellent essay. I'll put this link in the description of the show by Fox Nolte. And he actually covers 2 shows by Marc Davis, and this is taken from part 2. So a lot of the themes that you see here is taken from this essay. So I highly recommend reading it. First and foremost is motion as motif. So keep in mind, just like Carousel, the audience rotated around while the stage remained stationary. So motion itself is kind of the show's defining structure. Well, this of course involved a constant scene change. So they needed a sense of continuity across all the different acts. They achieved this through repetition and variation. You may remember earlier, I talked about a pattern in each act. That pattern was very intentional. Each act was designed as a self-contained unit, but it had its own patterns, callbacks, and emotional rhythm. So these recurring motifs, both within and between the acts, created a very cohesive experience. And it turned it into a narrative heartbeat. So here's a picture of Marc Davis and Al looking at the goose, the old gray mare goose, or not sure what animal that is. I think it's anyway. It's a very old picture, but you can see them working on it. Each act, in fact, the show itself was framed by Yankee Doodle, as you noticed between the transition between the different acts. Of course, it was performed by Sam Eagle, voiced by Burl Ives, and Ollie the Owl. A quartet of geese opened to every act. So I mentioned that already. And they were dressed to match the era. So you had this constant pattern of when you entered a new act, you would be introduced to the act by seeing our 4 friends, or in some cases 3 friends, dressed to be contextual to the era. And then the weasel. Of course, I mentioned the weasel popping up, and we'll say more about the weasel in a second. Each act built towards a kind of a keystone musical number. So each act had a big musical number towards the end, and it anchored the scene with emotion and comedic impact. Much like our friend here featured in Country Bear Jamboree, some of you may remember Oscar, the baby bear in Country Bears. Sometimes you may remember him from squeezing his teddy bear and making tweet, tweet, that kind of thing. Very similarly, the weasel in America Sings did something very similar. And it turns out that the weasel, in fact, appeared 7 times in America Sings. At the very end, there is a final payoff. The weasel says, instead of pop goes a weasel, he says, goodbye goes a weasel, which was fun. And it rewarded a lot of patience and laughter. Well, the weasel itself is very interesting because they aren't just comic interruptions. The weasel signaled a shift in tone and rhythm. So for example, when you had very kind of happy songs that were being sung, sometimes you needed a transition moment to something a little bit more somber, and vice versa. So in fact, in the Gay 90s segment, he appears twice. First to transition from Bill Bailey, which is a very exuberant song, to the restrained Sweet Adeline. And again later, he sounded like he was drunk, and it was a comedic payoff and a structural payoff at the time. So these moments, also when Sam and Ollie showed up, allows the show to slow down a little bit and to slow the pace so that there's some commentary that they could provide that contrasts with the show itself. Of course, the segment ended with a cascade of lots of repetitions like Pop Goes the Weasel, and then they transitioned into Yankee Doodle. In fact, the two MCs were very important. Sam Eagle and Ollie were critically important. And America Sings expanded the concept of master of ceremonies in this attraction. Here's another $5 word I'm going to teach you. And this word is called diegetic. And what diegetic means is that it represents part of the world that they're inside. So Sam and Ollie are part of this fictional world that you're a part of, yet they're talking to us from inside this world. Contrast that with other types of MCs that stand apart from the world, that are telling you what's happening. Well, Sam and Ollie, just like Jose in the Tiki Room and the Ghost Host, are diegetic. They're part of the show itself, and they're telling us about what the attraction is all about and what's happening. So this marked a distinctive shift. For example, Jungle Cruise had independent guides, or Storybook Land canal hostesses, that they stood outside the attraction, and they were in fact brought into the attraction to explain what was going on to us. The result, of course, and why I'm mentioning it, is that it caused deeper immersion. Sam and Ollie don't just host it, they're part of the story, and they're guiding people through the different eras of the songs, and they have wit, warmth, and theatrical flair. The audio animatronic figures were phenomenal, and there were so many of them. It represented a high point in WED's mechanical artistry for sure. They were fluid, they were purposeful, and they were never overcomplicated. Their design, in fact, Marc Davis had such a high point of design. Well, let me get to this too. They moved them famously to Splash Mountain, and they still felt fresh to this day. Just a few years ago, when people were riding Splash Mountain, they had no idea that these animatronics existed from 1974. And I want to point out that Marc Davis's designs were so expressive and set such a high bar that it almost outpaced WED's ability to create animatronics that would live up to these drawings. So for example, certain tableaus like the Prairie Dog couldn't quite capture some of the nuance and the wit of Marc Davis's brilliance. America Sings engaged viewers through a very deliberate rhythm. There was setup, there was payoff in almost every act. And in fact, in the opening scene, there was a little bit of essentially they're tricking you as well in the opening. When you enter the theater, you might expect immediate movement, like in Country Bears, when they all come out and start singing a big song. Well, in fact, the curtain rises and you saw Sam and Ollie completely immobile. So they weren't moving at all. And then they started singing. And there was this kind of delayed gratification, kind of reshaped your expectations to a small degree of how these animatronics should behave throughout the show. And like I mentioned, it's almost a reversal of Country Bears, where the animation just burst forth from the stage. Here, America Sings kind of teased and held its gunpowder, so to speak, and withholded what was coming. And it really rewarded the experience with that kind of surprise. The Boot Hill Boys I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned the dynamic staging too. There were figures rising, vanishing, and so forth that you never knew, which was great. There was interesting effects like the sky changing transparent so that you saw different characters behind it and things like that. The Boot Hill Boys were interesting in particular because they were visible throughout Act 2. They were only performing near the end, but they were able to portray Marc Davis's ideas by very minimal movement. Essentially, their head bobbed up and down, their head turned, and their beak opened. Yet to this day, people remember these two characters very well. All in all, America Sings kind of stood at a cultural crossroads. You know, just before the park was really focused on thrill rides, it kind of dared us to think about the full emotional spectrum of what an attraction was all about. After years of refinement, people still love and remember what this attraction meant to them. It was a proud declaration of creative mastery. It remains the first and only Disney attraction to earn emotional depth honestly, simply, and smartly, without sentimentality, without spectacle, for spectacle's sake. As a curtain falls, the show closed with one of America's most beloved songs, an invitation to reflect, remember, and celebrate. A fitting end to a grand and miraculous journey. So what I'd like to do now is to play the ending. Sorry, one moment. Let me find it.
Yankee Doodle always says the past is just a start. Tomorrow will bring songs to you that come straight from the heart. Another thing he had to say was life is just a song. So everybody get in tune and let's all sing along. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne?
Goodbye, goes a weasel.
And that was it. So, without further ado, let's talk about whether the ride works or not in our traditional way, using our three different pillars. First and foremost, immersion. I give it a 7 out of 10. Of course, the theming was on point. There were lots of animatronic and anthropomorphic figures, and the decorations of the set were very period specific, although not to a degree that Carousel was, of course. Motion, there was no problem. It was the same motion as Carousel. Transitions were great. The seamless transitions were done using light very effectively, and they twinkled some stars during the transition, so you had something to look at. Synchronized sound and lighting was fantastic. The believability was on point because the animatronic characters didn't really try to tell you that they were real. They were cartoonish characters, and that definitely sold it. Although entertaining, it kind of limited the realism. Probably the biggest knock I have against America Sings is its location. And I recognize that this is a lot of, there's a lot of practicality involved here. They couldn't exactly plop up the theater and move it somewhere else. However, there was a large amount of thematic dissonance with Tomorrowland. This was essentially a patriotic show that walked you through America's history through song. What does that have to do with Tomorrowland? Not much. There were a lot of surprises, like the weasel, and the animatronics were great. It was a very cohesive and entertaining whole. However, it didn't, like Carousel, it didn't have much of a queue or pre-show. So I give it a 7. 7 is a very respectable score. They did a good job there. Storytelling, similarly. There was essentially a segmented, but it was a very unified musical journey through American history, using the same kind of patterns that we saw from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3. Again, the word I taught you tonight, diegetic hosts. They acted as native narrators within the show, and these animal performers performed very defined roles, which really paid off. The animatronics were very detailed. Period costumes were great, and there was no issue there. The message was great. It celebrated American cultural history through song and heritage. And again, like I mentioned, the queue and pre-show were somewhat minimal. Again, sorry, but we got to knock it for its location. Its placement in Tomorrowland was not good. It was a very big kind of thematic mismatch. However, those of us who lived through the attraction remember it very fondly. And Delight, I'll knock it up a little bit, because those of us who remember this attraction remember it very fondly. lively animatronic cast. There was lots of humor and charm through the Weasel, through Sam Eagle, through Burl Ives' performance. The music was upbeat and varied, again, changing the energy levels throughout using those transitions we talked about. The rotating theater was great. Pop Goes a Weasel cameo was great. It was a lot of fun stuff. While nostalgic and charming, however, it was a fixed show content, and it was the same show every single time. So you can imagine after about 13 or 14 years, it might have started to wear out its welcome. Accessibility was no problem, just like Carousel was. And it was a pretty long show, just like Carousel was as well. It was about 20 to 21 minutes. You had to have a big commitment to actually sit through the show. But those of us who remember it fondly, remember it very, very fondly. So overall, I give it a respectable score, 7.32. Again, I'd like to encourage you to go to grandmiraculous.com, again, though, and in the domain name, and please rate it using these 3 different pillars, and we'll see what we come up with next week. Of course, the trivia answer for tonight, like I mentioned earlier, there were 2 geese that were brought out of the attraction and eventually became robots in Star Tours. So you can see the transition from goose to droid. Alas, at least they're still with us in some form. Before I get to next week, I just want to poke my head into the chat. I see some new friends. Mark Langenkamp is in the house. Mike Beachman. Hey, Mike, how you're doing fantastically. And Jason's in the house too. Thank you for all of you who came in and supported us here. So we are at the end of episode 14. It's hard to believe. Next week, episode 15, which is a mini milestone in itself. We'll continue the World's Fair theme, like I mentioned, from Spaceship Earth through Space Needle, through Carousel and America Sings. Well, there's one big attraction we've got to talk about that came from the World's Fair, and that, of course, It's a Small World. So I'm hearing screams of joy and screams of moaning. So those of you who might be on the moaning side, I hope you'll join me regardless, because it's a very famous attraction in Disney history. I don't need to tell you that. And there are some wonderful things behind it that really carry forward in all kinds of different attractions. So it would be remiss upon me as host of this show if we didn't talk about It's a Small World. So we'll go into that next week, and I hope you'll join me. Again, please hit like on this video. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already, and share it out if you found it interesting so far. Again, like a grand and miraculous spaceship, I'll end with Ray Bradbury's words. Gather round the next great campfire. Let us seek and know and understand and dream a new book, a new instruction book to fly great spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock in a dream that is your own. Find what truth is in your blood and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week.